Today is a much storied day. The narrative of Good Friday takes on proportions that are so oversized, they are difficult, if not impossible, to handle. How are we to speak of the terror of that original day? How can we find a way to narrate its enormity, let alone our place in it? Barbara Brown Taylor tells us there are many ways to tell the story of what happened on Good Friday. According to John, it involved a collusion between religion and politics, while Pilate and the chief priests conspired to solve their mutual problem while managing to remain enemies. Jesus stood at the center of the stage like a mirror in which all those around him saw themselves clearly for who they were. One way we Christians have avoided seeing our own reflections in the mirror is to pretend that this is a story about Romans and Jews. As long as they remain the villains, then we are off the hook, or so we think. Unfortunately, this is not a story that happened long ago in a land far, far away. Sons and daughters of God are killed in every generation. They've been killed in holy wars and inquisitions, concentration camps, and prison cells. And she then invites us to read ourselves into the story, to imagine it played out in our own generation. But since the very beginning, we have sought to elide ourselves from the story. And there are clues in the texts themselves that this is precisely what the earliest disciples were wont to do. In his narrative, St. John makes this quite clear. We are fine to make Jesus the singular and sole subject of the story. I am he declares 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane scene. And this is perfectly paired with Peter's tripartite, I am not. A generation before Barbara Brown Taylor, Dorothy L. Sayers, argued for the same. She writes, "For Jesus Christ is unique among gods and men. There have been incarnate gods aplenty, and slain and resurrected gods not a few. But he is the only God who has a date in history. Very God of very God sits in the text right next to he suffered under Pontius Pilate." All over the world, thousands of times a day, Christians recite the name of a rather undistinguished Roman proconsul. Not in extraction. Judas and Caiaphas were more guilty, get off with few reminders of their iniquities, but merely because that name fixes within a few years the date of the death of God. The name of an ordinary Roman official anchors the death of God in time and in space. For Sayers, this is the scandal of particularity. The Passion is not an abstract religious symbol, but a real event involving real people who did not understand what they were doing. We too easily read this story with hindsight, imagining that everyone knew they were crucifying God. They did not. And that illusion protects us. It lets us believe that we could only happen through extraordinary wickedness, through villains unlike ourselves. But Sayers refuses the comfort. God was executed, she says, by people painfully like us, in a sophisticated society, within a respected religious system, under an efficient government, by a corrupt church, a timid politician, and a manipulated crowd. Sounds all too contemporary. A generation even before Sayers, Christina Rossetti, in her famous poem Good Friday, also invites us to live into this dark but sacred story. She writes, sorry, Jenna, it's a poem. Am I a stone and not a sheep, that I can stand, O Christ, beneath thy cross, to number drop by drop thy blood's slow loss, and yet not weep? Not so those women loved, who with exceedingly grief lamented thee. Not so fallen Peter, weeping bitterly. Not so the thief was moved. Not so the sun and moon, which hid their faces in a starless sky, a horror of great darkness at broad noon. I, only I, yet give not o'er, but seek thy sheep, true shepherd of the flock, greater than Moses, turn and look once more, and smite a rock. You may have noticed that these voices are all the voices of women, great Anglican thinkers, each luminous in their own generation. And that's not accidental, because the story of women in the Passion is different. They are not easily cast as villains. They are not easily cast as heroes either. They do not hold the levers of power like Pilate. They do not orchestrate outcomes like the chief priests. They do not draw swords like Peter. They stand, they watch, they remain. And that may be the most honest place in the whole story. Because if Barbara Brown Taylor is right, and she is, then this is not a story about them. It's a story about us. And if Dorothy Sayers is right, and she is, then the people who participated in this moment were not monsters. They were ordinary. Painfully, uncomfortably, recognizably ordinary. Which means the question is no longer who killed Jesus. The question is, where am I in this story? Am I a Pilate, trying to do the right thing, but unwilling to pay the cost? Am I part of the crowd, swept up in forces I barely understand, shouting words I did not fully choose? Am I Peter, certain of my loyalty till the moment it matters most? Or am I among the women, standing at a distance or at the foot of the cross, not in control, not fully understanding, not able to fix anything, but refusing to leave? Christina Rossetti feels that tension when she writes, "Am I a stone and not a sheep?" Because the real scandal of Good Friday is not just what happened. It's our capacity to stand near it and remain unmoved. We seek to control it instead of staying open. We engage the story by attempting to narrate it, to theologize it, heck, even to preach it, and still not weep. And maybe that is where we begin. Not with the explanation, not with the resolution, but with this quiet, unsettling recognition. I do not fully feel this. I do not fully grasp this. I do not know what to do with it. Which is exactly where the first disciples were. They did not understand what was happening. They did not know they were crucifying God. They did not have the benefit of resurrection hindsight. They were simply living through something overwhelming, confusing, and terrifying. And that is why John's gospel gives us that strange, haunting pairing. Jesus says, I am he, and Peter says, I am not. I am not. And somewhere between those two statements, we find ourselves. Because we want to say, this is not about me. I'm not part of this. I wouldn't have done that. And yet the cross speaks to us and keeps insisting. Yes, you are here. Not because you are uniquely wicked, but because we are human. Because we are capable of fear, capable of self-protection, capable of silence when speech is needed. Because we are, as Sayers says, painfully like them. Yet here's the grace. The text tells us. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. The women stay. They do not fix it. They do not redeem it. They do not even understand it. But they remain. Perhaps that invitation to stay and remain is the invitation of Good Friday. Not to solve the cross, not to explain the terror, not even to fully feel what we cannot yet feel, but to stay. To stay and to look, to not excuse ourselves out of the story, to not rush to Easter too quickly, but to stand at the foot of a cross and let it tell us the truth about ourselves. And more importantly, the deeper truth about God. Because the final word of this day is not what we have done, it is what God does in response. Jesus does not say, look what you have done. He simply says, it is finished. Not as an accusation, not as completion, which means that even here in our confusion, in our complicity, in our distance, in our numbness, God is still at work. And so today, the most faithful thing we can do may be to not understand. It may simply be to remain with the women, ever faithful at the cross, present, honest, and not looking away. Maybe the only way to tell this story is to feel it and to truly live it by remaining. And that's what turns the horror of this day into a good day. Amen.